Are we gonna have that cool 7 o'clock thing?
Oh, yeah. Is your 7 o'clock going to go off?
I know, I hope so.
Oh, yeah, I got that going.
We love that.
It's awesome. It's how we open the show. Are we ready, Jeff?
Okay. Says we're live.
It
Says
says
we're
we're
live.
streaming.
Are we streaming? You ready? All right then, let's get started. Hello everyone and welcome back to Seek This Week. Every Thursday night we hold a town hall meeting. We provide updates on federal, state, and educational guidance, updates on mental health, education, evaluations, transition planning, community issues, and other important educational issues that are important to families of children with a disability. Also, we try to answer as many questions as we can from our leaders that are child advocates and attorneys within our state that serve on our board. I'm Barbara Gistinti, and I'm a teacher, and I'm also the parent of a child in special education.
Hi, I'm Julie Swanson. I'm a special education advocate, and I also have a grown son who has gone through the special education system. He has an autism spectrum disorder, and I am the outgoing president of SEEK and remain on the executive committee.
Hi, my name is Jeff Forte. I'm a special education attorney. I also have a child with disability that's on an IEP for dyslexia.
Hi, I'm Jen Laviano. I am the mother of 2 adolescent girls. I am also an attorney, a special education attorney. I am on the executive committee of SEEK, as well as the co-chair for the attorneys committee of COPA, which is our national parent attorney and advocate organization. Andy?
And I'm Andy Feinstein, and I'm an attorney in Mystic, Connecticut. I do have a son who has an IEP, and it's an adventure getting him to do his work at home, but fortunately, that's my wife, not me. Don't worry about that. I didn't say that. I am on the executive committee and the treasurer of SEEK. I'm chair of the legislative committee of SEEK, lobbying in Hartford, and I'm a co-chair of government relations for COPA, our national organization. Before we go on, I just want to remember Josh Kovner, a reporter with the Hartford Courant for many years, covering disability issues. He died today. We don't know exactly how or why. It was pretty sudden because I talked to him about a week ago. He was a great reporter, a great friend, somebody who really knew disability issues and really cared about it. And we're all going to miss him.
Yeah. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you. Thanks, Andy. You can, if you visit SEEK website, you can see the rest of our board and you can see their bios. Our mission at SEEK is to advocate, educate, and legislate for the 80,000 children in special education in Connecticut. We also work on behalf of the kids with 504 plans and kids who should be identified but are not yet. You can find out more about SEEK at our website, seekct.com. Please consider signing up out on our website in order to receive ongoing information and letting us know that you're out there. Jen, give us a little disclaimer for the show, please.
Okay, this is our weekly disclaimer. While several of us are attorneys, this is not intended to be legal advice, and we ask you to remember a couple of things. One is that you may be posting on Facebook Live with some questions, or you may send us questions, which we've received in advance through our email. Please keep in mind that if you do post in a live forum, such as on our Facebook page, you could be disclosing the identity of your child as a child who has a disability, and we always assume that there may be somebody who's watching who you may not trust or want to know that. It is entirely up to you as the parent. We just ask you to remember that. The other thing is, in your questions, we ask that you keep things fairly general, because we are, again, not giving you legal advice for your individual child or your individual student that you may be working with, but are in fact trying to answer as many questions as possible during this very difficult time of school closure that can be as helpful to as many families as possible. So thank you.
Thank you, Jen. So we are going to start with what's going on with current guidance from state and federal. We're actually going to start with Jen. What's happening at the state level? What happened this last
This
week?
week.
Since last
Okay.
Thursday?
Okay, well, we've been assured that we are going to be getting new guidance from the State Department of Education with regard to, we assume PPTs as well as perhaps some other subjects. This week is what we've been told. It hasn't happened yet, but as soon as we have it, we will be responding as SEEK, and we will certainly be discussing it next week, assuming we do get it this week.
And posting it, and posting it.
And posting it for
On
sure.
our website.
Absolutely. On our website, seekct.com. Also, the governor yesterday issued yet another executive order. In it, there was some very good news for many of you and certainly for many of us who have been concerned about those students who are in birth to 3 services and turning 3 during this period of school closure. The governor extended the eligibility beyond 36 months for those students, so they will continue to receive those birth to 3 services while we await the transition or the transfer and evaluation to school district services down the road. So that's great news for those families. And the other news, which is not really formal news, but we've been in regular contact with the state, mediations are beginning to get scheduled again virtually. There's various platforms that have been discussed. And so that's very good news for those families who are in disagreement with their public school district about what next steps may bring with regard to the summer and next school year, as well as the fact that I'm noticing, and I understand from my colleagues they are as well, that virtual and or telephonic PPTs are starting to get scheduled with much more consistent regularity. So that's good news as well for those of you who feel that you need to discuss your child's IEP and plan for the coming school year.
Great. Andy, can you catch us up on the federal?
2 things. A few moments ago, the House of Representatives passed COVID-4, the 4th bill, this providing $484 billion on top of the $2.2 trillion previously appropriated. This had no provisions in it, particularly related to education. The Senate already passed it. It goes to the president, who said he's going to sign it, and that will loosen up some of the small business lending that's come to a halt. Getting to this bill was a major hassle with Senate Republicans, and the White House taking the position that all the bill should do was put more money into the PPP program, the Small Business Lending Program, and House Democrats and Senate Democrats taking the position that there's desperately needed money for hospitals, desperately needed money to get state unemployment systems working, and the like. Why that's relevant is that from the point of view of Senator McConnell, the Republican leader of the Senate, no new bills are going to be passed. No further bills are going to be passed. And he said that states are on their own, and particularly singled out Connecticut as a state that probably should go bankrupt, he said. The House, the Democrats, both in the Senate and the House, take the position that there's still a lot of work to be done. And one of those things to be done is that the Secretary of Education, either tomorrow or early next week, is going to deliver to the Congress a report on possible waivers in the IDEA made necessary by school closures. Those waivers can only take effect if they're passed into law, which takes passing legislation, and no legislation is going to pass unless there's some substantial increased funding for COVID. As for the waivers, we're not expecting any good news from Secretary DeVos, and it's looking now as if we're going to have a partisan battle between Republicans taking the position of broad waivers and Democrats taking the position of no waivers. Now, into that breach has stepped our Senator Chris Murphy, along with his right-wing Republican colleague Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, with a letter to Secretary DeVos, talking about not touching the basic fabric of the IDEA, having very limited flexibility, but most importantly, having substantial additional money for special education. We don't know how that's going to play out. In my role with COPA, I'm deeply involved in these negotiations, such as they are about waivers. There's a couple of documents out on waivers now. One is by the National Association of Special Ed Directors, which was pretty broad waivers of numerous provisions of the Act. And then there's an even more appalling one put out by the Superintendent's Association. Now, the Superintendent's Association have for years been trying to gut due process protections, and their waiver letter seems to be, taking Churchill's advice of never letting a crisis go to waste. And they're trying to use this as the vehicle to really undermine parents' rights under IDEA. The key bottom line is, we, the parents, are being out-lobbied in Washington. You need to write an email, a letter, a phone call to your representatives, to your senators, even though they are in Connecticut uniformly on our side. It's still very important that they hear from us. Our position is there's plenty of flexibility in the statute. We don't need any waivers.
And I just would encourage our viewers to go to copa.org. So it's COPAA.org. There are a number of action alerts with very easy to follow contact information for your representatives and other legislators that you can be in contact with, including model language and things of that nature. So keep your eyes and ears out for action alerts from us and from COPA, please.
Okay. So this week we said you out in the audience, you are the star of this week's show. We asked what's happening, catch us up on what's going on with the distance learning plan for you and for your family. And we heard from a few of you anecdotally, but we picked one particular scenario to discuss just because it's complicated. Everybody's situation is complicated, but this one had quite a few questions. So I'm going to start reading, and I'm going to ask our executive committee to weigh in on some of the questions that arise. So this says, I am frightened and deeply concerned for my child's academic and social progression under our current situation. Simply put, this isn't working. I've asked various teachers in the district if the district is able to offer Zoom classes to support my son and his special ed peers, but I'm told they cannot offer these services because of FERPA. But I am hearing from parents and teachers in other school districts that special ed students are receiving support individually and in groups on a regular basis via Zoom. So I'm going to stop right there and say, what's up with Zoom? What's up with FERPA?
The state has put out guidance suggesting that districts stick to asynchronous learning and not synchronous learning. Synchronous learning is where a bunch of kids are together and they can see each other, and it's like a regular class. The state has pushed asynchronous learning to avoid privacy issues, and the concern is that parents may see things that go on that maybe we don't want them to see go on. Now, that's good and bad. I mean, a child with a disability who has a meltdown, I don't want that to be witnessed by a bunch of parents either.
Sure.
Nevertheless, one of the most critical elements of education, in my mind, is socialization. And sticking to asynchronous learning completely defeats the possibility of socialization. And I think the state has established the balance way too far on the side of privacy and too far away from the issue of socialization. So some districts are doing classroom type activities, a lot are not. And I've been pressing the state to move on that issue, and we'll see whether something does happen in that regard.
Andy, it would be helpful if you could define for those who don't know what FERPA is.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I wish the state knew what FERPA was. That's the Family Educational Records Privacy Act. First point about FERPA, that's a right that belongs to parents. It's not a right that belongs to schools. Schools assert confidentiality as if it's their right. And secondly, it refers to educational records that are created, not to who's in your class or not the classroom activities. And the third thing is, while students are probably entitled to some level of privacy, we all know who's in our kids' classes. There's actually an exception to FERPA for telephone directories and the like. And so the fact that I see that Devin and Liam are in my son's class, I knew that. And I don't think there's any violation of privacy there. I think this is a reaction. Now, there have been a fair number of lawsuits out there of parents claiming their privacy has been violated and suing school districts. Now, I don't think many of those suits have been successful, or not many of them. Nevertheless, I think this is an overreaction by board attorneys to try to avoid lawsuits like that in the future.
Oh, Julie, we can't hear you.
Sorry.
That's
Can
all
you hear
right.
me?
Now I can hear you, yes.
I've got some lawn mowing action going on outside, and I really didn't want anybody to hear all that, so sorry. Some districts are asking parents to, there's to sign a waiver basically saying, I understand that you might see other kids. If we do this synchronous learning and, keep private about it. Actually, most of them are pretty well written, the ones that we've seen. So if a parent, it's very interesting to see what's going on that realm.
Well, our problem with that was that a lot of them said, if you don't sign to agree, we're not going to provide any services to your kid. And that's clearly unacceptable.
Well, not all of them said that, though. Was it? Most of them? Okay.
Well, look, we as SEEK wrote a letter about that about 2-3 weeks ago. And that's led to sort of a flurry of activity and a rewriting of a lot of them. I think most of them are not taking that position now. But there are still vestiges out there. And that's, of course, one of our problems in Connecticut. There are 210 different school districts in the state, among 169 towns, figure that out. And they all write their own rules. And the State Department of Education, our State Department of Education, has steadfastly refused to be the regulator of school districts. If you go to another state, if you go to New York, the State Department of Education sets some fairly strict rules, maybe too strict, and school districts have to follow them. In Connecticut, there's none of that.
All right. I'm going to move on to the next part of the question. The more familiar I become with my son's true abilities in a skill, this was writing in particular, I question how was he making satisfactory progress for his IEP goals and objectives as reported in the beginning of March. They had a PPT then. What I do know is with each day that passes, he loses whatever knowledge he's acquired before the shutdown in several subjects, not just writing. So it sounds like all the skills are regressing. Does anyone, I know it's not officially a question.
Sure.
Go ahead, Jen.
Let me respond in a couple ways. First, we're very sorry to hear this. And unfortunately, we are hearing this about a number of students that we work with that, for those of us who are doing this professionally, we were working with before the closure, and they were already regressing before the closure, which is why they asked for professional assistance. SEEK has put on its website a data collection sheet, a weekly data collection sheet for families. There's one in English and there's one in Spanish. And it's on our school closure page of our website. And the whole idea there is for families to be able to, who are home with their children, to be able to keep weekly data across various domains to share with your school district. Because one of the things that's very important to us, and we have said this every week and we're going to continue to say it, is when schools do reopen, and we wish we had a crystal ball, but we don't, as to when that will happen. But when it happens, we want to make sure that the educators and the team and the parents are as accurate as possible about what the students' present levels of performance are as of that time. And it may be very different for many of these students from what it was when school closed, unfortunately. So it is important to the extent you can. We know everyone is so overwhelmed to try to stay on top of that information. And then we encourage families to just continue to communicate with their team. And so if you really are seeing a tremendous amount of regression, it doesn't necessarily mean that the goals and objectives were being inaccurately reported previously. The structure and nature of school is very different than the structure and nature of home. And so it may be that the things you're seeing weren't happening in school before the closure. However, it's we think an opportunity for parents to really understand now how their students, how their children learn as students, and what is and isn't working. And so we just really encourage you to be very transparent with your school district about what you're seeing and with as much data as you possibly can provide.
And if I could just add to that, oh, I'm sorry, Jeff, were you going to say something?
Go ahead, Julie. I'll go after you.
I was going to say, that sort of brings up for me something, the last 3 weeks as we've come to you with this forum is we've talked about the fact that we all need to be reasonable with one another. Having said that, we're now into this, 5-6 weeks. I'm not quite sure. I've lost count. I think, again, I think we can all safely say that the crisis reactionary mode of this has moved on to everybody's settled in. We do believe that, as far as what you're requesting for your child, that in proportion to it being not a brand new situation anymore, the level of your reasonableness, we think can go, push a little harder. Now, having said that, I've been on some meetings with stakeholders throughout the state, and it's come to our attention, there are school districts who have lost staff. There are school districts whose staff have lost family. And so obviously we need to keep all of these things in mind. But having said that, now that we're not, this isn't so new anymore, I think you can continue to have that open communication with your team and up the ante to the extent that it's appropriate and continues to be reasonable considering all the circumstances.
And we want districts to be reasonable too.
Of course. Yeah.
Definitely.
That works both ways. I should have said that. Yeah.
Part of the question that parent is asking as well is kind of the pre-corona time period. I believe the question was something about the district is saying probably in their progress towards IEP goals and objectives as reported in the beginning of March, right?
Yes, yeah.
The question also had to do with FERPA. And what a lot of parents that I find don't actually realize is that districts, if you request it, have to provide you with the backup data to support the progress that your child's making on the 1 to 2 page progress notes that will state satisfactory, right? What is the raw data or the weekly collection, the summary of that data to support that your child's progress is satisfactory? Just don't take the word satisfactory on the sheet and call that a day. Actually ask for the supporting data, ask for the sample worksheets, ask for the sample school assignments. In this case, I believe it's writing, right? So ask for the sample work products that the teacher is using as evidence to support the satisfactory towards that. And that is what you're entitled to under FERPA. So oftentimes when we get involved, we will get more FERPA compliance than, let's say, an average parent would. But a parent should know that they should be asking for this underlying evidence, this underlying data to support the cumulative summary that's reflecting that the child's making satisfactory progress.
You mean
I want to get
Right,
on this one too, which is this. The district may well have hoisted itself on its own petard, whatever petard may be. You're going to go to a PPT to plan the program of your child when the child returns to school. At that point, the present levels of performance are going to show substantially weaker literacy skills than the school documented in March. At that point, it is entirely reasonable to seek goals and objectives that take you to the March level and beyond, and to demand the level of services needed to get there. And the school at that point cannot say, oh, the goal's too hard, the goal's too distant, the service level is too extreme. The school's got to say, we've got to get him back to that level and beyond. That data, their statements that he was doing so well back in March, whether true or not, is what you're going to use to say, this is where the goal level ought to be, and this is the level of services we're going to require to get to that goal level.
And just one more thing to add to that, if the district doesn't have the data to support the representation that your child's making satisfactory progress, that's a whole nother issue, okay? Because you're entitled to have it. If they haven't been taking it and they're just giving you their kind of anecdotal judgment that's not actually supported in the fidelity of the implementation of that goal and objective, that in of itself is a problem. That in of itself is an issue that would rise to the level of a problem with your district. So
To
ask
that point,
for the underlying data.
and to that point, Jeff, I would ask parents to really familiarize themselves with the IEP goals and how they've been written to be measured, because the devil is in the details. And pay very close attention to the performance criteria and the measurement criteria. And that's the data you're talking about, right? So.
Right.
And you're not done with the question yet, Barbara.
No, we haven't even gotten, so we're almost finished. But I mean, the great thing is, I mean, we'll say this is a scenario that probably answers a lot of people's questions. So I think especially taking data, and now that we have, as parents, have much more responsibility than we've had before, much more access, it's really important to discuss this. So here's the next part. When the school reopens, what rights do I have for service for my son to get him caught up? If they're able to open during the summer months, how do I request ESY? And can I request they pay for private tutoring?
So I'll take some of that. So a lot of the theme and the questions that we're seeing tonight are reoccurring. And I think it's good because parents that are listening to us tonight are going to hear about this in a lot of different fact patterns in a lot of different ways. So when your school opens up, you're going to want to be requesting a reevaluation, right, to determine what your child's now current levels of performance are compared to what your child's levels of performance are in the latest IEP that your child currently has before school's closed. And then you and your team are going to want to be able to compare what those two present levels of performance are, and any delta that you need to close the gap in is where you should be addressing really to drive new services. There's other parts of that question, but that's where I would start. And, Jen and Andy were mentioning, I think 2 weeks ago, we put on about data collection, and we're going to be talking about that more tonight as well. It really behooves parents to attempt to take some type of data points on your child's education now to further support your request that you're going to need a reevaluation to determine what the present levels are.
And Jeff, if I could just have a clarifying question there, if you could specify what you mean by evaluation, because it doesn't necessarily need to be a full-blown psychological or reading eval. It could just be getting what is the baseline again and doing some progress monitoring. That
Right.
could be what you're talking about as well.
Yes.
And also just reminding parents that if you don't know how to take data, you've never done it before, you can request parent training. This is an excellent opportunity to talk to your teacher, talk to the teachers, talk to your team and say, this is a related service and this would really help me a lot. And it will really go a long way toward you understanding your child's program and how they learn.
Babs, can I address the ESY question?
Sure.
So for those of you who maybe your child has not received it before, or for those of you who are who get sucked into us falling into alphabet soup, which we tend to do very often in this field, ESY stands for Extended School Year Services, and generally they're those services that provide summer services to students with disabilities who require them because they meet the criteria for needing ESY. We don't yet know if the schools will be open for the summer. We all certainly are hoping that they will be, but we don't know if the buildings will be open and able to be accessed. I certainly think that this is something that if you haven't yet, if your child is typically ESY eligible, it's probably a good idea to ask at this time for a virtual or telephonic IEP meeting to occur so you can discuss ESY, including possibly, even though the state has said that the purpose of PBTs during this period of time should not be to discuss distance learning. If ESY is going to be distance learning for your kid, you might want to have an opportunity to talk about it, and we certainly think that you should. You know, we don't have a lot of time before that's going to come upon us. I think one of the things that we are a little worried about is, given that we lost about 6 weeks of what is typically end of the school year PPT season planning, we're going to be cramming a whole lot of meetings into a short period of time. And so I think it's a good idea now to reach out to your district and say, I really feel it's important for us to talk about ESY. We will continue to keep you posted. It's possible the new guidance from the state will include some guidance about extended school year services this summer. And it may be that your child hasn't previously been eligible for ESY, but you feel is eligible now. And we could do a whole show, a whole session on talking about the standards for extended school year services. But we just want to make sure you're documenting your request for it.
Could we put
The
up
final-
on the chat the link to the topic brief on extended school year services so parents can access that? How should we?
I can post it after.
I could also put it on the website as
Yeah,
well.
let's make sure we have it on the website.
But if we could just for
We can
now
also put it up on the chat, even if we do it after the show.
Yeah,
Sure.
because, you know, it's really helpful. You know, lots of teams will unwittingly, I'm not saying it's always done purposefully, will they just believe it to be true that the only thing you have to prove to see if you're eligible for special education is regression. There are other standards, and it's really an analysis. And you have to look at each IEP goal and objective to see if it rises to that criteria. But it's really helpful to see that topic brief on extended school year services. So we'll provide that for you.
Okay, there's one more question there, which is, can you ask the district to pay for private tutoring? The answer is yes, you can ask them whatever you want. Maybe due to staff shortages or whatever, they might agree to that. Probably unlikely. Now, there is a legal doctrine out of something called the Burlington case, which says that if the district fails to provide a free, appropriate public education, the parent can go unilaterally and secure the services they need and then seek reimbursement from the district. There is, and that can be done either with a full placement or with a partial unilateral placement. But this is a big legal issue, and you're going to have quite a fight on your hands if you want to go that route. And so just be aware that your request is a request, not a demand, that you don't have a real legal right to demand private tutoring. And if you want to go through the partial unilateral parental placement route, you can do that, but that's not going, the fact that you might do that is not going to convince most school administrators to voluntarily pay for your private tutoring.
Can I just add something about IEPs? I know we're not spending a whole lot of time about, you know, what should you be making sure you do at an IEP team meeting. There are some pros and cons to taping the meeting. I think we can do that for a virtual PPT, is my understanding. It's always a good idea. And then also, if you are requesting something, and again, this isn't legal advice, but, you know, ask very specifically, I'm asking you under prior written notice, and that get their answer to be very specifically enumerated on prior written notice. Don't let it just be a throwaway that never makes it onto the document. And ask very specifically what the reason is for denying it. Just a little tip.
I just want to say, on recording virtual PPT meetings, that's an extraordinarily complicated legal issue. I would assert that we have the right to do that, particularly if it's computer-based rather than telephone-based. Nevertheless, that's not a simple issue.
Gee,
And
Melody,
it's not something you should do without alerting your team that you are intending to record ever.
maybe this will be something that is handled in
Covered in a
guidance
future
coming up. That would be
next
wonderful.
week, yeah.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
All right, so we are going to, thank you very much for all of that. And I hope that was helpful for our friend who sent in that scenario. Now we have questions. We have lots and lots and lots of questions from our audience. Are we ready? Jen, you have the first one, okay? This is from Danielle. Currently, our special education children are entitled to an education until age 21. With everything that's happening with distance learning, some are going to be coming out better from it for the simply fact they can concentrate and learn and others will regress significantly. So my question to you today is, what do you think the chances are that education until the age of 21 can possibly extend one additional year to accommodate the kids who were basically slighted due to extenuating circumstances? Many children will have regressed so significantly, it may take an additional year or close to that to catch up emotionally, academically, etc. Does anyone know if this option has been thrown out there, or if anyone's working on it in a way to help our kids who have lost so much time because of these circumstances beyond their control?
Okay, so let me first say, yes, we are working on it. We at SEEK are working on it. We have been very grateful to have been invited to provide some insight and some of our own thoughts and recommendations with the State Department of Education and the Bureau as to what we feel would be appropriate ways to handle a number of situations, one of which is transition into adulthood. For those of you who are maybe not as familiar with the obligations under the transition laws, and the issue around the age of 21, students who have IEPs in the state of Connecticut are eligible for services from their school district once they're deemed eligible for an IEP until one of three things happens. The student's behavior, performance, or academic and other skills become such that they're no longer eligible as a child with a disability, so they get exited. 2, they receive a high school diploma. Or 3, they age out. And in Connecticut, that is the school year of their 21st birthday. So through June 30th of the year, they turn 21. We are very concerned about the number of students who are in that 21st year now, who are using the end of their eligibility services to prepare them for adulthood. And we have floated some ideas to the Bureau and to the state, and we will continue to do so. Analogous to what has happened today with those students, or yesterday, I should say, who aged out of birth to 3, but are sort of being grandfathered into services. We would hope that there would be at least some commensurate extenuated services for those students who missed out from, say, March 13th through whenever. We don't know when that whenever is. If it's 3 months, if it's 6 months, if it's 9 months, heaven forbid. We certainly advocate that those students should be entitled to have those services beyond their traditional aging out age extenuated so that they can benefit from those services. Now, that said, every individual student is unique, every individual person is unique, and what a particular student might require as a result of being out of school for this period of time is going to vary dramatically from another. And we are expecting that there may be some students who significantly regress enough that there is a real question about how we remediate that.
Okay, thank you, Jen. Our next question is for Andy. Andy, parent of a 4-year-old in pre-K services for speech and language delay, wants to retain the student in the pre-K program for 1 more year because he was not afforded the full benefits of the program due to the school's closing for the COVID-19 crisis. The administration is denying the request, claiming it would be illegal to retain a student due to a disability. What should the parents do?
This is a more complicated issue because the State Department of Education a number of years ago issued a memorandum stating essentially that a kid who's got special education could not get a second year of kindergarten for that special education. The memo, I think, was very poorly reasoned, not based on good law, and needs to be revoked, which is an argument we've been making for years. Nevertheless, it's basically our position that your PPT has the right to determine the grade level that the child's going into based on the child's present levels of performance. So, for example, if you were in 3rd grade and wanted to spend another year in 3rd grade, it'd be our position that the PPT could decide that. Now, schools uniformly take the position that that's their decision, that their administrator gets to make that decision, but that's an issue that we could contest. In the case of kindergarten, we have this added wrinkle of what's known as the Sonati memo, after the author thereof, and which makes it even harder. So you can ask, but I think you have no right to insist on another year of kindergarten.
Do we need to put the Sonati memo up somewhere?
I don't know that we have to put it up. We can talk about that. We can certainly post it on the chat. One thing that we want you all to know is our website, you know, every time we post additional information, we have to take old stuff down, and some of it we don't want to take down because it's really important. What I do want to note, though, that is that if you are aware that your district has a policy that for all children, it's a parental choice about whether to promote your child into kindergarten, then, you know, they really would not be, in my view, following the anti-discrimination provisions of Section 504 if they said there's a different rule for kids who have disabilities. If your regular education child could stay in kindergarten because you want them to, but now your child who has a disability, that seems discriminatory to me.
But I also wouldn't, and you know, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, if you feel so strongly that you have a really good argument as to why you'd like to retain your child, I don't think you should not ask.
Absolutely
and
should.
have that discussion.
Absolutely should.
Yeah.
But something Jen said prompted me to say something else, which is the reason we have limited capacity on our website is because we have a limited budget. We are not a membership organization. We do not collect dues. We do, however, have a lobbyist in Hartford, and we do have maintain a website, and that costs money. And so we would really appreciate it if you could donate to us so that we could get more capacity on our website and so that we could pay our lobbyist and be more effective for you.
I am the person who does the website, and I did start a page for archives. So, you know, we're trying our best to fit it all in there under the GoDaddy domain that we have. So,
And you can, on our website, you can donate, you can sign up so you can hear from us. And again, we really want you to join us in every possible way. But thank you, Andy. Thank you, Julie, for all of that. Let's go on to the next question.
Perhaps just to underscore, why doesn't Julie or Andy share the legislation that we helped to pass last year in effort with our lobbying efforts, just really quick?
I'll do that. So we're so proud at SEEK that in our first year out of the gate, where we are working with a lobbyist, our very first bill that we put forward was a teacher anti-retaliation bill, which we are so pleased to say passed and is now Connecticut law. And we do have that up on our website under the legislative page. And basically what that says is that if anybody who sits around the IEP team table on behalf of your child should not be retaliated against for speaking up on behalf of what they believe your child requires as a part of their IEP program. It is most unfortunate that we even had to put forward such a bill. We're certainly not saying that this happens in every school district. However, it can and does happen where there could be a great deal of pressure put upon people who work for schools to make sure that the recommendations that they make are in alignment with their budgets and their resources. So we're so proud of that. And we would, you know, please go onto our website. You can print it out. If you feel that that's something that when you go to a PPT meeting that you feel you want to bring to your administrator's attention, just to say, gee, I'm aware of this, and how should we handle this in our IEP process? It's a really great tool for parents, and we're so very proud of that. Unfortunately, we had some other things that we were going to be legislating on behalf of this year, but as we all know, unfortunately, the session does not exist. But we created SEEK because we wanted to be the voice of the parents of the 80,000 children here in Connecticut who have disabilities having an IEP or a 504 plan. And we are the only organization that represents the voice of the parents, and we want to be your voice in Hartford. So we're really proud of our mission, and you can learn more about it on our website.
Thank you, Julie. And just so you know, we're all volunteers. We're all volunteers. So it's we do need to do some fundraising because we do have a lobbyist, and that's what gets us access to Hartford, and that's how we can speak for you. So again, anything you can do, we appreciate it, but definitely sign up so we can follow you. We can send you out the information you need to get. So let's continue on with our questions. We have, this was for Julie. Julie.
Okay.
Is it possible to request the school to assign a different physical therapist for our daughter? We don't feel good about the current PT. We know they're contracted by the school. We'll be able to find another physical therapist to work with our daughter.
Well, okay, great question. Really, this hasn't changed due to the fact that we're in school closure mode right now. Parents do not get the right to pick and choose who is the person who is implementing an IEP goal and or objective, or who your teacher is. However, what the school's obligation is to make sure that they talk about the level of expertise that the person has to have to implement that IEP goal, whether or not it's a physical therapist or a CODA, which is the person who works under an OT or PT. I forget which one it is. I think it's an OT, a speech and language pathologist. So you don't get to pick and choose. However, having said that, if there is some compelling reason that it's not a right fit, I think the thing to do is reach out to your director of special education or the person with whom you have a good relationship with on the team. Clearly not the PT. You don't want to make this personal, or at least I wouldn't. That's just my own personal style. I don't want to make somebody, make anything personal. But if you feel there's some compelling reason, you should start by having a private conversation with somebody on your team and laying out the reasons why you believe this isn't a good fit, and request it and see what happens. It is altogether possible that it could happen. I think what could be incredibly challenging, especially now during these times, is, you don't know within a school district, they may be short on people due to, being down a PT based on somebody in their family is sick or something like that. So, you just don't know what circumstances are driving that. But do reach out to someone on your team or your director and say, look, I've got some real concerns and here's why, and
Great.
see where that takes you.
Thank you, Julie.
Sure.
This next one is for Jen. This is a question from Nicolette, and this is about grading. Some districts are using a grading system while other districts are not. Can you please explain the benefits and non-benefits of both outcomes? What we should be requesting as a community with special education children? How will this pan out going forward with the system of record, no record, also pass, fail for our special education children? Can you please cover the varying grading system put forth in various districts? So grades versus pass, fail.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. We did get some guidance on grading, and it does have different suggested possible categories for districts, including there's pass fail, there's pass fail with distinction, there was a incomplete, and there are different populations of students that are sort of singled out within each of these proposed categories. But like much of the guidance we've received, in fact all of it, it's not really a directive to districts. It is guidance. It's here's some ideas you might want to do. And while we respect that the state is trying to give districts discretion, what it is resulting in is a wide variety, even within one school district, from building to building, of how these issues are being approached. And it can be extremely challenging and confusing for parents. I know this sounds like such a lawyer's answer, but it really does depend. And the reason is it very much depends on your student, your child that you're advocating for. Because if when school ended, your child was one of those students that was barely passing, then maybe pass fail makes sense at this particular point. If you are feeling strongly that you want to demonstrate that without the supports in school, your child is failing now but wasn't before, then maybe you want to advocate for something different. However, at this point, we don't see that this is really a parental choice. This is a district choice as to how they're going to be grading students, including issuing credit. And it's very confusing. As with anything else, what we would suggest is you make sure you document your concerns. And certainly, you might want to have a sense of whether, hypothetically, if your child is participating, let's say, in a math Zoom classroom with his or her non-disabled peers, and your child has an IEP, you certainly would want to know, and there, many ways that parents can communicate with one another, whether your child is the only one that's on a pass fail. If all of the kids who don't have IEPs are getting actual grades, but your child is getting a pass fail, you might want to at least to ask for the rationale behind such a decision, as to why your child is getting treated differently. And so this is one of those areas where we have a lot of concerns as SEEK and as individuals, because we are worried that we are losing an opportunity to stay on top of those present levels of performance by simply moving to a pass-fail model. And there's no science behind this, and I'm not an educator, but when pressed with whether to fail a student or whether to pass them, many educators are going to pass them, and it's not necessarily a reflection of how well the student's doing in the class. And for some of our students, it can be really a lost opportunity to understand the skill level. So I wish I had more guidance other than to say that you should take a look at what the state is providing by way of guidance and ask your own district and your own team what the rationale is behind whatever grading system they're using for your child.
Great. Thank you, Jen. And do we have that guidance from the state on our SEEK
Yes.
website? Yeah.
Great.
Pretty sure, yeah.
Yeah, great. Terrific. All right, our next question is for Jeff. Jeff, this is a question from Sarah. What about the summer? Is it reasonable for districts to provide help to kids over the summer that they're not able to provide now?
Sure, Sarah. So first, for parents that do not have a child that's gone through ESY yet, let's really kind of take a step back for a moment and explain what ESY is, okay? Because there's categorical differences between the definitions of summer school versus ESY, which the acronym alphabet soup and special ed law, ESY stands for extended school year. Legally speaking, summer school and ESY are not the same things at all right? ESY means literally that you're extending your child's school year beyond the typical 180-day, 9-month school year program, in which your school district is providing additional weeks of specialized instruction and related services that are individually designed to meet your child's needs as part of your child's IEP. Okay? And ESY is delivered at no cost to the child under the FAPE provisions of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Okay, I mean, we could literally have an entire program on ESY, but the leading case in which most districts, federal districts, look upon is the Alamo case, the Alamo Heights School District case, which is out of the Fifth Circuit. And that legal standard encompasses more than just asking whether or not your child will lose certain skills or regress with certain skill sets if your child's no longer being provided with special education and related services under the IEP. That's just one standard. So you're going to want to look at things, for example, like what's your child's working memory like? What's their working memory index score on their assessments? Do they require continuous reinforcement? Does your child have difficulty retaining skills over a short period of time, right? So you're going to want to talk with your school team about that. And absolutely, if you have concerns about this, you want to request ESY and you want to explain the reasons why you're feeling that if your child does not get this, they're going to regress and the district may have to recoup on lost skills that were diminished because the child wasn't actually receiving the services that they would be during the typical 180 days, Babs.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. All right, next question to Andy from Lauren. Can we ask for a reevaluation because we may have changes with our child being home so long?
Yes. Look, to establish a program, you need to have present levels of performance. How you determine those present levels of performance is, one way is evaluations, another way is work samples. my only caveat about asking for a full reevaluation is that's going to take time. And during that time, your child's not going to get any additional services. They're probably going to get the services that were in the IEP before the closure. And so you can ask, it seems to me that you want to have the targeted assessments that are necessary in order to design a program. And you probably don't want to go overboard with a full reevaluation unless there's some real crying need to do so.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, next one. This is from Christina. How is student progress going to be accurately measured to assess if the student is meeting IEP goals and is prepared for the next grade level?
Good question, Christina. So just because school programming is physically closed, it doesn't mean that right now the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is on vacation, all right? So school teachers and school professionals are still required to be collecting the data relating to your child's delivery of service hours, as well as the goals and objectives within your child's IEP, okay? So if you look at the way in which in your child's IEP goals and objectives are developed, look at what they are using to determine the data that is supporting the child making progress towards those goals and objectives, okay? You may recall that I think it was the week of April 9th, I think, that we had Attorney Jen Laviano and my wife, Dr. Solani Forte, going through the data collection parent sheet that we came up with, and it's still on our website, and it's both in English and in Spanish, to empower and educate parents on how to take some of that data for their child so that you can more fully collaborate with your school team when it comes to the concerns as to whether or not your child's actually met their goals and objectives, okay? So I would refer parents back to that April 9th video in which we went through all of the important points and we went over the data collection, but you're gonna wanna check that out.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Next one is for Andy. This is from Jill. What about districts saying they're only going to do half of the services on the IEP?
Wrong. The IEP process is an individualized process, and while there can be probably some reduction of services during the period of school closure, doing it in an arbitrary way by saying you're going to get half of what you previously had is not individualized, is not appropriate, is not based on the child's abilities. Wrong. Can't do it.
Okay. Next question. This is, and by the way, we lost Julie. I'm not sure what's happening, but hopefully she'll join us again. So Julie, come back to us. Jen, this next question is for you from Terry. What happens if an outplay student regresses during the school closure? Is there a plan to extend compensatory time owed to that student since direct services such as ABA are difficult to implement remotely?
So part of the answer to the question depends a bit, actually a lot, on whether or not the child is outplaced through their IEP, meaning that the school district initiated the outplacement as part of the child's individualized plan, or if the child is what we call unilaterally placed, meaning the parent has outplaced the student at a private program and is contracted with that private program. If it's the latter, then you're dealing with a very different situation, and the chances are unlikely that there would be any kind of an entitlement there. You would really want to be looking at your contract with the private placement as a parent to see what, if any wiggle room you have to try to ask for services to be made up. If it is, however, an outplacement that's done through the child's IEP, that is still ultimately the obligation of what we call the LEA, the local educational agency. So whichever school district initiated that outplacement through the IEP, they're ultimately responsible to make sure that FAPE, free and appropriate public education, is being offered to the student. And that would be just as if the child was placed in the district, that would be the subject of all of the same conversations that we're having about how we're going to try to remediate students who might lose some skills or services during this time.
Great, thank you. Andy, the next one is from Hillary. How do you address virtual speech? The child just started virtual speech after sending an email to the district, but the district claims the child should get less hours than the IEP.
Okay. First, teletherapy has become very popular and apparently very successful. And indeed, in the area of speech therapy, it's people are saying that it's working quite well in some cases. I've not seen a speech therapy session virtually, but that is being done. Now, during this period of closure, you're not entitled to all the services that you would get under your IEP. That's because schools obviously have serious restrictions on what they're able to do. And so the fact that the school is giving you less hours of speech services than you would have otherwise gotten is probably not a violation. What would be a violation is that you're not getting sufficient services for your child to make progress along the IEP goals and objectives relating to speech. And I think that the issue is much more one of creating a program after schools reopen to get the student back up to the level they would have been at. That's much more important than trying to argue that the program being given during a period of closure is not adequate.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, next question. This is from Bella. What happens to children with more severe disabilities that are not able to participate in distance learning and are regressing in every domain on a daily basis?
Well, Bella, this is a very tough question, right? And we're facing this with some of our students that have more challenging disabilities than others. You're going to want to be communicating with your child's school team as frequently as possible. And I'm assuming that you're doing that. If you're not, I'm hoping that you will after tonight. Okay. And you're going to want to be reaching out to your school team to find out if your school team can reach out to other state agencies that can help you to provide your child with additional support and assistance. Okay. You also want to reach out, as I'm hoping you're doing, to your child's private providers. So your child's doctor, your child's related clinical professionals, any professionals that you are working with that are covered under perhaps your health insurance. And you're going to want to try to build a wraparound type of service for your child during this remote learning time as much as possible. This is unfortunately, one of the challenges that we're having right now with our children that just simply are not able to engage in this remote access learning. So you're going to want to think about how in which you can further extend the professionals that are within your child's reach to add additional, wraparound services.
Okay, thank you. Next question is for Andy. This is from Megan. Was there something submitted to the state that outlines the school district's plans during distance learning in regards to IEPs? Oh, Andy, I can't hear you. You muted yourself.
I did.
Yes.
I'm not exactly sure I understand the question.
I'm not sure. But yeah, I don't know.
And now, if the question is, do we have copies of the district of the distance learning plans of each district? The answer is yes and no. The state has not collected them. There's no compendium of them, but we certainly have gotten numerous ones from various districts. I think virtually every district has published something with their distance learning plans. And so they are probably available. Does anybody check them for adequacy? No. Are there minimum standards that those distance learning plans must comply with? No. Unlike other states, however, I believe every single district in the state is providing distance learning. That is not true in other states. And there's a lot of communication among districts. And so, frankly, there's a convergence taking place on these distance learning plans. And so what you're going to find in one district is going to be pretty close generally to what you're going to find in another district.
Great. Thank you, Ian. All right, last question. This one's for Jen. This is from Nancy. We had an annual PPT in early March and never received the IEP document. Now our district wants a second PPT to talk about our requests. Our administrator agreed to many of our requests during the PPT, but at the end was backpedaling about making decisions. Will having a second PPT open our child up to the district changing what they seemingly agreed to?
Ooh, that's a tough one because you don't have the documentation of the first meeting. And, you know, certainly you want to make sure that in any communications you've had with the district, if you haven't already, that you've documented what you thought were the agreed upon items from the last meeting for which you have not yet received the IEP, all right, or the IEP paperwork. You know, we certainly think that especially if your district wants to have another IEP meeting and you have unfinished business, that you should participate. Again, you know, every case is different and there may be compelling reasons why you are not ready or they are not ready to do so, but these are not ideal circumstances. And so if your district wants to have an IEP meeting with you right now, we generally say you should absolutely participate, but given that you have not yet received the documentation of the prior meeting, not only would it be wise for you to document the agreements that were reached at the last one, but also that you haven't yet received the IEP paperwork. Now, we are all very aware at SEEK of some of the limitations that schools have, including, you know, their staff are working from home as well. They may not have access to their ability to print documents, but, you know, many districts, in fact, most, I think at this point, do electronically send IEPs to parents anyway, well before the closure. So I'm a little unclear as to why it would be so difficult for them to have gotten you the documentation from your last meeting by now. But you both want to document what you thought was agreed upon last time, as well as the fact that you have not yet received the paperwork from the last meeting. And then certainly go forward in this next meeting with an open mind and being prepared to ask that you get specific answers to your questions on the various items that are in possible dispute.
Right.
Let me add something to that. So a technique that I often suggest is that, welcome back, Julie.
I do.
A technique I often suggest is that the parent write a letter to the district saying, here's my understanding of what happened at the last PPT meeting. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Now that's obviously the lawyer's effort to create evidence, but it's almost never that the district writes back and says you're wrong. And so that serves as the one and only record of what happened at the meeting. And it's a, you know, it puts you in a great position doing that.
Great. All right. Well, Julie.
Sorry, I got booted off.
It's all right. You broke some.
Xfinity had to send me a new signal.
Well,
Pay your bill.
Just one question, Julie, and then
Julie was excommunicated.
Julie
I
gets
was.
she gets the last question. This is
Ooh.
from Christy. What are
Okay.
suggestions for transition meetings for moving on to the next level?
So, you know, Christy, when we got your question, transition can be seen as from one grade to the next, from between building and building if you're moving from grade school to middle school, or it could be the transition to adulthood. Whatever transition it is that you're talking about, right, this is where we need you to reach out to your team, ask for an IEP team meeting, and say that you would like to plan for it, whatever it is, whichever one you were referring to. It's just a common sense thing. How do you plan for whatever transition you're talking about if it hasn't been planned yet? So if and when it's extended school year, if that's appropriate, or if it's what's going to happen in September or whatever month it is that we may physically go back to school, I think the answer is to ask for that IEP team meeting and plan accordingly. Sounds like a pretty simple answer, but anybody else have anything to say about that?
Andy keeps.
No, I want to say something more generally, which is that the governor's reentry task force announced today, the chairman of that talked about hoping that we could start slowly to reopen the economy after May 20th, but not particularly optimistically. It seems to me very unlikely that schools are going to reconvene during this school year. It seems to me probably unlikely that there's going to be much in terms of a summer program, although that's, I would not estimate that. And finally, the head of the Centers for Disease Control talked about a fall second wave being as troublesome or more troublesome than the first wave. So as we talk about these issues, keep in mind that the return to school is not going to be an on-off sort of switch. It's not going to be that suddenly school reconvenes and it's back to the old days. First. Second, that we may go back and go back out again. Third, that schools have now set up the infrastructure for distance learning. And if there's any question because of health or maybe even because of weather about whether schools should be held, they're going to revert to going back to distance learning. So we are entering a new world, and it's time we wrap our head around the fact that going back to school 5 days a week, 180 days a year with all your fellow kids may not be in the cards for quite a while.
Well, and I think, I think, part of this, the answer that I should tell you is, we're really waiting on that new guidance. There are still some school districts that are refusing to hold PPT meetings. And so, what do you do about that? Those districts who are saying, that I'm hearing about at least, that are still saying, no, we're not going to hold them, are saying, but we're getting ready to. So eventually, we have to have IEP meetings to discuss what next steps are, regardless of what transition, Christy, you were talking about.
Okay. All right. So I think that's it for our questions. Thank you so much for questions. Please send in more for next week at seekthisweek@gmail.com. And we are going to go around with our takeaways now. Everyone, Jeff, can you start? Give us a little, what do you want people to remember?
Yeah, sure.
Next Thursday.
Over the course of the time that we've been doing this, we've been talking about what we deem as a board of SEEK is reasonable, okay? And that is a evolving standard based on what school districts are doing, but also the pace at which they're rolling these things out. So we know now that it is reasonable for all school districts in Connecticut to be conducting PPTs, without a doubt. If your district is not conducting a PPT, that means that your district is not being reasonable, okay? Second, we now know that mediations are occurring. So to the extent that your district is not willing to engage in a mediation, we know that that would be, well, it's voluntary, but if they're saying that they're not offering the services of a mediation, that would be unreasonable, okay? Next, your child's data. You want to make sure that your school team is still aware that they should be taking the information and the data to collect towards your child's goals and objectives as outlined in your child's IEP. We now know that those items, which may not have been reasonable the minute school closed, are now starting to develop to be reasonable again. So that would be my takeaway, Babs.
Great. Thank you. Jen, let's hear your takeaway.
Okay, here's my takeaway. For years, I have been saying, and Julie and I have been saying in our various presentations, that parent training, parent counseling and training, which is a related service under the IDA, is probably the most underutilized related service that exists. It is a missed opportunity in our view for many of our learners that school districts are not providing parents the supports they need to support the IEP in a meaningful way. And so one of the things that this closure has resulted in is parents are going to need more parent training because they are implementing parts of the IEP at home and they are boots on the ground. But also it really will, if Andy's predictions, as he shared a few moments ago, and the CDC's, as incredibly depressing as they are accurate, that we are looking at a very long-term closure or a quick reopening and then another closure. If we're going to have another closure, wouldn't it be nice if when that happened, not only were we all prepared because we now know where to buy our toilet paper, but we were all prepared because our parents are actually properly trained in implementing the IEP, and there aren't families with severely disabled students who are chasing their child around with an iPad trying to get them to distance learn, because we already have a plan in place for doing so. So my takeaway is that parent training has a new life during this period of school closure.
Thank you. Julie, let's hear your takeaway.
Well, Jeff and Jen sort of stole my idea, so I'm going to sort of do a hybrid. If I could just talk about parent training, I'm still thinking about all those families and kids who really aren't accessing this distant learning very well, okay? And they're just not doing well at all. And, part of what you could be asking for, I would argue, is help me, help us, help my child access distance learning under the parent training umbrella. And I guess the other thing that I want to say, since they sort of stole some of my ideas, is, now that we're into, well, this is our 4th show, right? Isn't it our 4th show? It's our 4th show. The novelty of all of this is sort of, fading. And I think what we're excited about at Seek is, as we continue to do these every week, we're going to branch out and bring talk about some different issues in addition to answering your ongoing questions and making you aware of what new updates are. But, we're going to be looking at equity. This has been a big subject that has come out of all of this, is that there's a lot of inequities, and the big old light has been shined upon them. And we're looking forward to coming to you in the coming weeks, discussing those issues and many more.
Great. Andy.
We formed Seek because all the other stakeholders had big voices in Hartford, and parents did not. We've seen a remarkable change. So today we wrote a letter to the Commissioner of Education about these reentry panels he's creating, saying we need to be represented on them. Within an hour, he wrote back and said, yes, you will be. Earlier today, Senator Chris Murphy asked us to put together a phone call to talk about his proposals on waivers in Washington. We're calling out to us because we're looked at as the voice of parents. This is a remarkable success that we're having. Extremely proud of what we've been able to do as Seek. And as long as I'm at it, once again, we need your money.
Okay, thanks, Andy. I won't say no to the money, but I will say thank you so much for joining us. One of the things we have been talking about at Seek for the last few years is how we can do more parent training. So this is just sort of the weird silver lining from the COVID situation, in the sense of we do get to talk to you every week, and we are really excited about this opportunity. This is much easier than from us driving from town to town and talking to different parent groups. So please tune in, please tell your friends, please watch the replay, whatever you need to do. And again, keep sending your questions in to seekthisweek@gmail.com. And next week we expect to have, we're waiting for some guidance from the state.
Right.
And so we should get that, and we will update you on everything else that's going on. So until then, stay safe, be well, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good night, everybody.
Woohoo!
Hey, let me pause it.